It was an unremarkable day in downtown Toronto, sometime in the early 1960s, when something truly remarkable is said to have happened, a strange encounter that still baffles those who dare to revisit it. On the busy corner of Bay and King Street, surrounded by the modern hum of city life, a man appeared seemingly out of nowhere. He looked confused, wide-eyed and utterly lost, like someone who had woken up in a world that was not his own. Dressed in old-fashioned clothes, a long brown overcoat, starched high-collar waistcoat, and boots that looked like they belonged in a 19th century portrait, the man caught the attention of passersby almost immediately. His set, a worn felt top hat, had long gone out of style, and his face bore the kind of thick, mutton-chop sideburns rarely seen since the 1800s. When a police officer approached him, thinking he might be part of a theatrical act or a local promotion, the man responded in a way that chilled the bystanders. He spoke in a peculiar accent, formal and antiquated, using words like gentleman constable and referring to Toronto as York, a name the city had not officially used since the early 1800s. As the conversation continued, it became clear that the man had no idea where or when he was. He kept asking about places that had not existed in over a century. He referred to street names, long erased from city maps, and inquired about horse carriages and gas lamps. The officer, thinking the man may have escaped from a costume party or suffered a mental break, brought him in for questioning at the local precinct. Things grew even stranger. The man had no identification, no documentation, and no fingerprints on file. When they searched his pockets, they found coins and paper bills all dated from the mid-1800s. His wallet contained a faded calling card with the name Edward Mallory, an address that no longer existed, and a business listing for carriage repair. Forensic experts later examined the items and concluded that the materials, ink, and printing methods were authentic for the 19th century. Believing him to be mentally unwell, authorities transferred him to the Toronto Psychiatric Hospital for further evaluation. A nurse who worked there at the time, decades later in a radio interview, described the man as polite, articulate, and terrified. He insisted he had been walking near the harbor when a loud ringing noise filled the air, followed by a sensation like falling. The next moment, he was standing in front of towering glass buildings and metal wagons rushing by at impossible speeds. That evening, as hospital staff were preparing to admit him for overnight observation, something inexplicable occurred. The man was led into a private examination room and left alone for just a few minutes. When the nurse returned, the room was empty. Completely empty. The windows were sealed, the door had been locked from the outside, and no alarms had been triggered. Edward Mallory had vanished without a trace. The story exploded into a swirl of rumors, tabloid headlines, and local gossip. Some believed it was a hoax or a prank staged by performance artists. Others claimed he had simply escaped and gone into hiding. But a small, growing number of believers insisted the truth was far stranger. The man had somehow slipped through time, a traveler from the 1800s who had briefly landed in modern-day Toronto only to return to his own era, or perhaps vanish into another time entirely. The Toronto police and hospital later denied that such an event ever occurred. There were no official records, no police reports, no incident logs that matched the story. The retired officers and nurses would sometimes whisper about that day, off the record, unwilling to go on the record but too disturbed to forget. Over the years, paranormal researchers and time travel enthusiasts have attempted to trace the identity of Edward Mallory. Some claim to have found a historical newspaper article from 1871 mentioning a man by that name who vanished during a thunderstorm near the Toronto harbor. The details are vague, but eerily parallel. Others believe the entire tale is urban myth, born of the 1960s fascination with the paranormal and Cold War anxiety. Still, the story refuses to disappear. It is passed down in hushed tones in Toronto and posted anonymously on internet forums by those convinced time is not as rigid as we believe. It has inspired short stories, blog posts, and even a stage play. The Man from York performed in local theaters. Whether fact, fiction, or something in between, the story of the time-traveling man of Toronto taps into a deep human curiosity. What if the barriers of time are not as secure as we think? What if, just for a moment, someone from the past stumbled into our present and left behind a mystery that no one can explain? Whatever happened that day in downtown Toronto remains a beautiful, baffling enigma. One man, one moment, one vanishing, and a question that lingers like a whisper in the city's history. Was he really from the past or just ahead of his time? And so, the story of the time-traveling man of Toronto drifts through history like the man himself, and unexplained and unforgettable. Was he a hoax, a hallucination, or proof that time is not a straight line, but a loop waiting to bend? We may never know, but every so often, Someone claims to see a man in old-fashioned clothes, looking lost on the streets of a modern city, just for a moment, before vanishing again. If this story intrigued you and left your mind racing with possibilities, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to West is Best, where legends live, mysteries unfold, and time itself might just take a detour. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a tale that bends reality and questions everything you thought you knew.